Welcome, my friends. It feels like a very, very long time since I last saw you. So it's good to be back. Please take a moment and pause the video and go wash your hands. I'm watching my cat, who's watching an Amazon delivery. I wonder what I got. Okay, clean hands? Fantastic. Chapter 8, finally. Land of Winter. Aye, she's got first sight, sure enough, said William's voice behind Tiffany as she stared into the world of the Queen. She's seeing what's really there. Snow stretched away under a sky so dirty white that Tiffany might have been standing inside a ping-pong ball. Only black trunks and scribbly branches of the trees here and there told her where the land stopped and the sky began. Those, and of course, the hoof prints. They stretched away toward a forest of black trees bowed with snow. The cold was like little needles all over her skin. She looked down and saw the Nakmekfeegle pouring through the gate, waist deep in the snow. They spread out without speaking. Some of them had drawn their swords. They weren't laughing and joking now. They were watchful. Right then, said Rob Anybody. Well done. You wait here for us. We'll get your wee brother back. No problemo. I'm coming too, snapped Tiffany. Nay, the Kelda does not. This one does. I mean does, said Tiffany, shivering. He's my brother. Where are we? Rob Anybody glanced up at the pale sky. There was no sun anywhere. Well, you're here now, he said, so maybe there's no harm in telling you. This is what you call fairyland. Fairyland? No, it's not. I've seen pictures. Fairyland is all trees and flowers and sunshine and tinkliness, and dumpy little babies in romper suits with horns and people with wings and weird people. I've seen pictures. It isn't always like this, said Rob Anybody shortly. And you cannot come with us because you have no weapons, mistress. What happened to my frying pan? Said Tiffany. Something bumped against her heels. She looked around and saw not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock, holding up the pan triumphantly. Okay, you have a pan, said Rob Anybody, but what you need here is a sort of thunderbolt iron. That's like the official weapon for invading fairyland. I know how to use the pan, said Tiffany, and I'm incoming, yelled Daft Woolly. Tiffany saw a line of black dots in the distance and felt someone climb up her back and stand on her head. It's the black dogs, said not as big as medium-sized Jock, but bigger than wee Jock, announced. Dozens of 'em, big man. We'll never outrun the dogs, Tiffany cried, grabbing her pan. Didn't need to, said Rob Anybody. We got the Gunnagle with us this time. You might stick your fingers in your ears, though. William, with his eyes fixed on the approaching pack, was unscrewing some of the pipes from the mouse pipes and putting them in a bag he carried hanging from his shoulder. The dogs were much closer now. Tiffany could see the razor teeth, the burning eyes. Slowly, William took out some much shorter, smaller pipes that had a silvery look to them and screwed them into place. He had the look of someone who wasn't going to rush. Tiffany gripped the handle of her pan. The dogs weren't barking. It would have been slightly less scary if they were. William swung the mouse pipes under his arm and blew into one until the bag bulged. I shall play, he announced, as the dogs got close enough for Tiffany to see the drool, that firm favorite, the king under water. As one pixie, the Nakmekfeegle dropped their swords and put their hands over their ears. William put the mouthpiece to his lips, tapped his foot once or twice, and as a dog gathered itself to leap at Tiffany, began to play. A lot of things happened at more or less the same time. All of Tiffany's teeth began to buzz. The pan in her hand vibrated and dropped onto the snow. The dog in front of her went cross-eyed and instead of leaping, tumbled forward. The Grimhounds paid no attention to the pixies. They howled, they spun around, they tried to bite their own tails, they stumbled and ran into one another. The line of panting death broke into dozens of desperate animals twisting and writhing and trying to escape from their own skins. The snow was melting in a circle around William, whose cheeks were red with effort. Steam was rising. He took the pipe from his mouth. The grimhounds, struggling in the slush, raised their heads, and then, as one dog, they put their tails between their legs and ran like greyhounds back across the snow. Well, they ken we're here now, said Rob Anybody, wiping tears from his eyes. I had to pause for a second because my roommate got home, so I'm just going to start at the beginning of this page, which I think you've already heard, but it's okay. Well, they ken we're here now, said Rob Anybody, wiping tears from his eyes. Oh, heaven, said Tiffany, touching her teeth to check that they were all there. He played the notes of pain, Rob Anybody explained. You canna hear 'em because they're pitched so high, but the doggies can. Hurts 'em in their heads. Now, we'd better get moving before she sends something else. The Queen sent them. But they're like something out of nightmares, said Tiffany. Well, aye, said Rob Anybody. That's where she got them. Tiffany looked at William McGonagall. He was calmly replacing the pipes. He saw her staring at him, looked up, and winked. The Nakmekfeagle take music very seriously, he said. And then he nodded at the snow near Tiffany's foot. There was a sugary yellow teddy bear in the snow made of 100% artificial additives. And the snow all around Tiffany was melting away. 2 pixies carried Tiffany easily. She skimmed across the snow, the clan running beside her. No sun in the sky. Even on the dullest days, you could generally see where the sun was, but not here. And there was something else that was strange, something she couldn't quite give a name to. This didn't feel like a real place. She didn't know why she felt that way, but something was wrong with the horizon. It looked close enough to touch, which was silly. And things were not finished. Like the trees in the forest they were heading toward, for example. A tree is a tree, she thought. Close up or far away, it's a tree. It has bark and branches and roots. And you know, they're there, even if the tree is so far away that it's a blob. The trees here, though, were different. She had a strong feeling that they were blobs, and were growing the roots and twigs and other details as she got closer, as if they were thinking, quick, someone's coming, look real. It was like being in a painting where the artist hadn't bothered much with things in the distance, but quickly rushed a bit of realness anywhere you were looking. The air was cold and dead, like the air in old cellars. The light grew dimmer as they reached the forest. Between the trees it became blue and eerie. No birds, she thought. Stop, she said. The pixies lowered her to the ground, but Rob Anybody said, we shouldn't hang around here too long. Heads up, lads. Tiffany lifted out the toad. It blinked at the snow. Oh, shope, it muttered. This is not good. I should be hibernating. Why is everything so strange? Can't help you there, said the toad. I just see snow. I just see ice. I just see freezing to death. I'm listening to my inner toad here. It's not that cold. Feels cold to me. The toad shut his eyes. Tiffany sighed and lowered him back into her pocket. I'll tell you where you are, said Rob Anybody, his eyes still scanning the blue shadows. You ken them wee bitsy bugs that cling onto sheeps and suck themselves full of blood, then drop off again? This whole world is like one of them. You mean like a tick? Or a parasite? A vampire? Oh aye, it floats around until it finds a place that's weak on the world where no one's paying attention and opens a door. Then the Queen sends in her folk. For the stealing, you ken. Raiding a barns, rustling a cattle. We used to like stealing the cow beasties, said Daft Willie. Wooly, said Rob Anybody, pointing his sword. You ken I said there was times you should think before you opened your big fat gob. Aye, Rob. Well, that was one of those times. Rob turned and looked at Tiffany rather bashfully. Aye, we was wild champion robbers for the Queen, he said. People wouldn't even go a-hunting for fear of little men. But 'twas never enough for her. She wanted more. But we said, it's no right to steal an old lady's pig, or steal from them as didn't have enough to eat. A feagle has nae worries about stealing a golden cup from a rich big job you ken, but taking away the cup an old man kept his false teeth in made them feel ashamed, they said. The Nakmekfeagle would fight and steal, certainly, but who wanted to fight the weak and steal from the poor? Tiffany listened at the end of the shadowy wood. to the story of a little world where nothing grew, where no sun shone, where everything had come from somewhere else. It was a world that took and gave nothing back except fear. It raided, and people learned to stay in bed when they heard strange noises at night, because if anyone gave her trouble, the queen would control their dreams. Tiffany couldn't quite pick up how she did this, but that's where things like the Grimhounds and the Headless Horseman came from. These dreams were more real. The queen could take dreams and make them more solid. You could step inside them and vanish, and you didn't wake up just as the monsters caught up with you. The queen's people wouldn't just take food, they'd take people too. Like pipers, said William McGonagall. Fairies can't make music, you can. She'll steal a man away for the music he makes. And she takes children, said Tiffany. Aye, your wee brother's not the first, said Rob Anybody. There's not a lot of fun and laughter here, you ken. She thinks she's good with children. The old Kelda said she wouldn't harm him, said Tiffany. That's true, isn't it? You could read the Knack McFeegle like a book. And it would be a big, simple book with pictures of Spot the dog and a big red ball and one or two short sentences on each page. What they were thinking turned up right there on their faces, and now they were all wearing a look that said, Cravens, I hope she doesn't ask the question we didn't want to answer. That is true, isn't it, she said. Oh, aye, said Rob Anybody slowly. She didn't lie to you there. The queen will try to be kind to him, but she doesn't know how. She's an elf, and they're not very good at thinking of other people. What will happen to him if we don't get him back? Again, there was that, we do not like the way this is going look. I said, Tiffany repeated. I dare say she'll send him back in due time, said William, and he will not be any older. Nothing grows old here. Nothing grows. Nothing at all. So he'll be all right. Rob Anybody made a sound in his throat. It sounded like a voice that was trying to say aye, but was being argued with by a brain that knew the answer was no. Tell me what you're not telling me, Tiffany said. Daft Willie was the first to speak. That's a lot of stuff, he said. For example, the melting point of lead is... Time passes slower the deeper you go into this place, said Rob Anybody quickly. Years pass like days. The queen will get tired of the wee lad after a couple of months, maybe. A couple of months here, you ken, where time is slow and heavy. But when he comes back into the mortal world, you'll be an old lady, or maybe you'll have died. So if he has bairns of your own, you better tell them to watch out for a wee sticky kid wandering the hills, shouting for sweeties, 'cause that'll be their Uncle Wentworth. That wouldn't be the worst of it either. Live in dreams for too long and you go mad. You can never wake up properly. You can never get the hang of reality again. Tiffany stared at him. It's happened before, said William. I will get him back, said Tiffany quietly. We don't doubt it, said Rob Anybody. And where you go, we'll come with you. The Knack McFeegle are afeard of nothing. A cheer went up, but it seemed to Tiffany that the blue shadows sucked away all the sound. Aye, nothing except lawyers, Daft Willie tried to say before Rob managed to shut him up. Tiffany turned back to the line of hoofprints and began to walk. The snow squeaked unpleasantly underfoot. She went a little way, watching the trees get realer as she approached them, and then looked around. All the Knack McFeegle were creeping along behind her. Rob Anybody gave her a cheery nod, and all her footprints had become holes in the snow with grass showing through. The trees began to annoy her. The way things changed was more frightening than any monster. You could hit a monster, but you couldn't hit a forest, and she wanted to hit something. She stopped and scraped some snow away from the base of the tree, and just for a moment there was nothing but grayness where it had been. As she watched, the bark grew down to where the snow was, and then it just stayed there, pretending it had been there all the time. It was a lot more worrying than the Grimhounds. They were just monsters. They could be beaten. This was frightening. She was second thinking again. She felt the fear grow. She felt her stomach become a red hot lump. She felt her elbows begin to sweat. But it was not connected. She watched herself being frightened. And that meant that there was still this part of herself, the watching part, that wasn't. The trouble was, it was being carried on legs that It had to be very careful. And that was where it went wrong. Fear gripped her all at once. She was in a strange world with monsters being followed by hundreds of little blue thieves and black dogs, headless horsemen, monsters in the river, sheep whizzing backwards across the field, voices under the bed. The terror took her. But because she was Tiffany, she ran toward it, raising the pan. She had to get through the forest, find the queen, get her brother, and leave this place. Somewhere behind her, voices started to shout. She woke up. There was no snow, but there was the whiteness of the bed sheet and the plaster ceiling of her bedroom. She stared at it for a while, then leaned down and peered under the bed. There was nothing there but the gazunder. When she flung open the door of the doll's house, there was no one inside but 2 toy soldiers and the teddy bear and the headless dolly. The walls were solid. The floors creaked as it always did. Her slippers were the same as they always were, old, comfortable, and with all the pink fluff worn off. She stood in the middle of the floor and said very quietly, "Is anybody there?" Sheep baaed on the distant hillside, but they probably hadn't heard her. The door squeaked open and the cat, Ratbag, came in. He rubbed up against her legs, purring like a distant thunderstorm, then went and curled up on her bed. Tiffany got dressed thoughtfully, daring the room to do something strange. When she got downstairs, breakfast was cooking. Her mother was busy at the sink. Tiffany darted out through the scullery and into the dairy. She scrambled on hands and knees around the floor, peering under the sink and behind cupboards. "You can come out now, honestly," she said. No one came. She was alone in the room. She'd often been alone in the room and had enjoyed it. It was almost her private territory, but now, somehow, it was too empty, too clean. When she wandered back into the kitchen, her mother was still standing by the sink washing dishes, but a plate of steaming porridge had been put down in the one set place on the table. "I'll make some more butter today," said Tiffany carefully, sitting down. "I might as well while we're getting all this milk." Her mother nodded and put a plate on the drain board beside the sink. "I haven't done anything wrong, have I?" said Tiffany. Her mother shook her head. Tiffany sighed. And then she woke up and it was all a dream. It was just about the worst ending you could have to any story, but it had all seemed so real. She could remember the smoky smell in the Pixie's cave and the way, who was it? Oh, yes, he'd been called Rob Anybody. The way Rob Anybody had always been so nervous about talking to her. It was strange. That's my cat, Mavis. It was strange, she thought, that Ratbag had rubbed up against her. He'd sleep on on her bed if he could get away with it, but during the day he kept well out of Tiffany's way. How odd. There was a rattling noise near the mantelpiece. The china shepherdess on Granny's shelf was moving sideways of its own accord, and as Tiffany watched with her porridge spoon halfway to her mouth, it slid off and smashed on the floor. The rattling went on. Now it was coming from the big oven. She could see the doors actually shaking on its hinges. She turned to her mother and saw her put yet another plate down by the sink, but it wasn't being held in a hand. The oven door burst off the hinges and slid across the floor. "Do not eat the porridge!" Knack McFeagle spilled out into the room, hundreds of them, pouring across the tiles. The walls were shifting, the floor moved, and now the thing turning around at the sink was not even human, but just stuff. No more human than a gingerbread man, gray as old dough, changing shape as it lumbered toward Tiffany. The pixie surged past her in a flurry of snow. She looked up at the thing's tiny black eyes. The scream came from somewhere deep inside. There was no second thought, no first thought, just a scream. It seemed to spread out as it left Tiffany's mouth until it became a black tunnel in front of her, and she fell into it. She heard the commotion behind her. "Who do you think you're looking at, pal? Cravens, but you're gonna get such a kicking." And that is where I shall stop. We still have a bit of this chapter to finish, so that'll be the next video that I post. It was good to see you guys again. I hope all of you are doing well and finding ways to have some fun while you're at home, and I will see you next time. Bye.